Hello there. Today we are taking a look at Don't Give Up. This game was in the August Humble Bundle as their original game for the month. This means you don't get a Steam key for it, you just download and play it. This is an RPG about a mentally ill game developer trying to find success in his life in both career and personal relationships. Immediately, it reminded me of Undertale in its tone, simple graphics, and fun upbeat music. The main character, Triss, has lost his job and is taking it pretty hard. After downing a few beers in the bathroom, Triss heads back for more beer from the fridge and is confronted by an inner demon that tells him to go get a knife for obvious self-harm purposes. Initially, you can control Triss and you try and stop yourself from doing the self-harm, but resistance is ultimately futile and Triss gives in and the scene fades to black. The next scene is a person on what looks like another planet. Instead of controlling Triss, you control someone named Cerberus, which I believe is just Triss's subconscious. A Cape monster starts chasing Cerberus and combat is introduced. There are two phases to combat: the monster's turn to attack and your turn to attack. On the monster's turn to attack, there are 4 squares that you're jumping between. The squares will flash red or blue. You want to not be on the red one, you want to land on the blue. When the red one finally stops blinking, the monster will attack that square. You can choose to stay on the red square and do a counter attack instead. It's up to you. All the while this is going on, you can spam the X button to start breaking the monster's guard, which is a meter down in the lower right corner. Once you eventually break the monster's guard, it's your turn to attack. And once it's your turn, you just spam buttons. There's no real strategy to it. This goes on back and forth until eventually the monster dies. The monster doesn't have a health meter that I noticed anyway, so it's just back and forth until whenever. As I said, eventually you win the fight. At that point, Cerberus retreats until he finds a sword and the monster makes back up with him again. It's implied that with this new sword, Cerberus is going to be able to finally fight the monster, but at that point, the scene fades to black. The game cuts to yet another scene. This time it's a downtown setting and a lady's purse is getting stolen. Triss sees this happening and decides to chase after the robber. Triss catches up and combat starts again. This time you're given the option of a dialogue tree before the fight begins. All the different dialogue choices are insults to the robber, and depending on which insult choice you pick, you can either get yourself a positive combat buff or a negative combat buff, depending on which one you pick. But it's not entirely obvious which one does what. I really felt like I was just guessing. The way the game describes it, you want to insult the person, but don't insult them so harshly that it makes them mad. It wasn't very intuitive, but either way, you pick one and on combat begins. This also introduced the ultimate meter, which there's a little sword. As the fight goes on, it builds up, and if you hit the Y button, you do an ultimate attack. Again, combat's very simple, which is not necessarily a negative, but it is very simple. Triss defeats the robber, and the screen fades yet again. This time it turns out that the whole robbery scene was just a dream, and we're back to controlling Triss. Only now it's a few years in the future after his incident with the knife. You control Triss as he gets showered, gets dressed, and calls his friend before meeting her at a party. Triss is nervous about the party, but he needs to go get something to eat before he meets his friend, so he decides to order a pizza. Triss meets a cute girl in the apartment while he's on his way out to pick up the pizza, and a few dialogue choices are offered. Triss arrives at the pizza parlor where a skinhead decides to pick a fight with him over his pizza. Combat starts again, very simple this time. You win the battle, and your pizza gets dropped. Luckily, the pizza owner gives you a new one, and Triss is back on his way to the apartment. As soon as Triss gets back in the apartment, somebody accidentally knocks the pizza out of Triss's hand, but they give him $1,000 for it. Triss goes back upstairs, says he's going to just phone in a delivery order, but as he's inside in the hallway, he sees the girl he met before. Her name is Billy. She kind of feels bad for him, says, "Hey, I've got some Thai food. Would you like to split it with me?" And Triss says, "Hey, that's great. I would love to do that." So then Triss heads back to his apartment, gets cleaned up, gets the pizza off his shirt, and goes back into the hallway where now Billy's gone and he's not quite sure what apartment she was in. He goes, knocks on a few doors, and eventually he does find Billy. They split dinner. There's a few dialogue choices in there where you can choose to be funny, things like that. No matter which one you pick, I'm pretty sure they all end up with you ending up with Billy's phone number. So at this point, we're about 30 minutes into the game, and this is where I eventually just set the controller down. The initial pacing and weirdness of the first 10 minutes of this game hinted at a bizarre and fun game with fast-paced, if somewhat simple combat. Unfortunately, after that first 10 minutes was done, the game slogged down with boring gameplay, little combat, and a story that wasn't actually interesting. It was 20 minutes for one combat fight and a story that amounted to talking to a girl in the hallway and getting her number. I will acknowledge this game is made to appeal to a younger audience than myself, since the main character even references himself as a hipster. I had high hopes for this game with its charm and its weirdness and its fun combat, but unfortunately the game steered more towards a story-driven path, and in my opinion it just didn't have enough interesting dialogue to keep me playing. It's not a bad game, but for me, it's a pass.